So we had the topic on nonverbal communication by Lizzie, Joy, Amanda, and Casey. And the question is, should Cornerstone students get training in nonverbal communication in preparation for missions trips? So first we want to talk about what is nonverbal communication. The definition of nonverbal communication is those aspects of communication such as gestures and facial expressions that do not involve verbal communication, but which may include nonverbal aspects of speech itself, including accent, tone of voice, and speed of speaking. Some other more common nonverbal communications are hand gestures, facial expressions, and body language. And nonverbal communication also does not have to be something that's intentional. For example, if you're trying a new food and you say you like it, but your face might show otherwise. And the 6 universal emotions that can be detected throughout all cultures are surprise, disgust, anger, fear, sadness, and joy.
So we did some research to determine if this would be good for Cornerstone students, and the first study measured patient anxiety levels from doctor visits. So in this study, patients were studied and analyzed in pre-consultation and then throughout their visit when visiting their general practitioner. They were self-assessed and also assessed through video monitoring and by professionals. The purpose of this was to equip doctors to communicate and relate to anxious patients just by recognizing their nonverbal cues and by seeing the effects of those in their relationships with the doctors. So here's some critical analysis of the study. The control group was made up of 707 participants who were blind to what they were doing and being measured, giving them just less issues and more credibility. The sample size was nearly 2,100 adult patients, and they were all studied in adult Dutch culture from 142 general practitioners. 1,388 of these patients completed a pre-consultation questionnaire, and the assignment of groups for who did the pre-consultation questionnaire and who did not were randomly assigned. The study said there was no difference in ages, genders, sexes, anything like that. The information allowing replication makes the study seem pretty easy. There was a video set up and the analysis was done through well-known assessment, so someone could replicate this study. However, there was not specific details on what the questions were. They were never listed, so someone would have to come up with their own questionnaires. For anecdotal evidence, none was found, but the survey was based on subjective material, so it is limited and weak depending on someone's own interpretation. This was a peer-reviewed study, though. It was published in Emerald's textbook, Health Education, and also given on the school's database under peer-reviewed. So it does have credibility. For the variables, the independent variable would be the participants in the study, as they were random. The dependent variable was patient anxiety levels, since that's what was being measured. And there were many controls. The video setup was the same for all patients, and then all of the assessments in the pre-consultation, video analysis, and nonverbal analysis were all by credible different systems and scales that are well known. And lastly, the nationality of participants were the same across the board. So results, most were shown to have anxiety levels, and a third of them had very high anxiety when meeting with their doctors. This was again assessed through these tests that most use to determine attitudes of patients, and the implications that anxious patients rarely express their emotions explicitly, but act in nonverbal ways and different than those who are not anxious. So recognizing those for general practitioners is crucial to be able to read their emotional signals. So this applies to Cornerstone students. Anxiety can definitely hinder relationship building, so students need to know how to address that, recognize it, and deal with them to connect with individuals. The students themselves may be anxious and need to understand what signs that would be like. And in the case, it was shown that most anxious patients don't express their anxiety, so it's critical that students can recognize these interactions and make others feel welcome.
The second study that we looked at how leaders influence followers with nonverbal communication. So the summary for this study was that participants took a survey after watching a video of a leader speaking, and they were testing to see whether or not the participants felt distant or connected to the speaker based on the speaker's nonverbal gestures. And each participant watched a different video where the speaker showed different gestures, and that was positive gestures, negative gestures, or none at all. And the purpose of this experiment was to address the relationship between the leader's use of specific hand gestures and the followers' attraction or connection to the leader. So here is the critical analysis for this study. The control group and sample size was 89 males and 121 females, so 210 was the sample size. The assignment of the subjects. So participants were shown one of 3 videos, each showing different hand gestures, the positive, defensive, or none. They were to watch the video and respond to some questions after that, where they answered whether they felt connected or distant to the speaker. The video that each participant got was randomly selected. The information allowing replication. So there was enough information provided if we wanted to conduct our own study, we could do that. We would just have to read in detail and know exactly what they did to replicate the experiment. There was enough information for us to do that. There were no anecdotal evidence in the article journal that we looked at. And for peer review, it comes from a leadership and organizational development journal. For the different variables, the independent variables were that there were different hand gestures used by the speaker in the video for the different participants. And the dependent variable was whether or not the participants felt distant or connected to the speaker. And the controlled was that each video shown had the same verbal content to it, even though the gestures were different, the thoughts that the speaker was saying was the same. So the results and conclusions for study 2. The results was that participants perceived leaders with no hand gestures and defensive hand gestures to be distant or non-immediate, and the leader with positive hand gestures to be more immediate or attractive. The results given from the study was in paragraph form rather than in tables or charts. And conclusions that we can take from this study is that it's important to use positive hand gestures and body language when trying to communicate with others, especially when you're immersed in another culture. It's super important to know positive hand gestures that they use and common ones that they use so you can really connect with them. So, importance of learning nonverbal communication. So, not making hand gestures at all in order to avoid offending people still isn't good. No gestures is just as bad as defensive hand gestures. So when you are in a situation where you may not know what's a positive hand gesture for their culture, like making no hand gestures at all is still, you're not connecting with them. In order to reach out to people on a missions trip and have them actually receive the gospel message and know what we are saying, it's important to learn to know how to use their most common positive hand gestures in order for them to receive your message and what you're trying to say, which would be the gospel in a missions trip perspective. So we do support Cornerstone students to take a class that would help teach them nonverbal communication and body language. It's important in order to connect with people in other cultures, to have that positive body language.
The Christian perspective of nonverbal communication is important because, 1, it is our job to communicate the Word of God cross-culturally, even if we do not speak the same language. We will cross paths with people who cannot connect with us, but nonverbal communication can help us when trying to share the Word of Christ. Which leads to the next point, that nonverbal communication can convey our emotions